you can see Anne. She's going to be presenting about abolishing the Electoral College, clearly one of our goals. And, I'll let Anne tell you what she likes for us to do. Okay, Anne? So you're ready to
Yes,
go?
sure.
Okay, thank you.
Um,
I'm going to turn my audio off.
okay, well, welcome to the League of Women Voters of Central New Mexico and Los Alamos presentations about the Electoral College. I'm Ann Gaylor, and I'm a Central New Mexico League member, and decided after the 2024 National Convention to make it my business to research and carry on the League's um, goal of abolishing the Electoral College. So, did you know that the United States is, in political terminology, a partial democracy, not a full democracy? This is because we do not directly elect our two most important government officials, our president and our vice president. We are the only major democracy in the world where the people don't directly vote for their heads of government. And this is due to the system created during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, and that we call the Electoral College. Today, I'd like to explore what this system is, how it damages our democracy, and what we need to do to change it. This has been abolishing the Electoral College has been the League of Women Voters position since 1970. In the National Convention of the League in 2024, the League moved to reinvigorate its efforts to abolish the Electoral College. Okay. Here we go. And here's what I'd like to do in terms of an agenda today. Look at the system created in Article 2 of the Constitution for electing our chief executives. See how it works in New Mexico. Take a kind of a deep dive into its history. Discuss what's wrong with the system and how to change it. We should have time for questions and discussion at the end. So if you would, please put your questions in the chat box so we can get them all. So what is the Electoral College? The Electoral College is the process by which the states and District of Columbia select the president and vice president of the United States. Each state is represented by a number of electors equal to the size of its congressional delegation. So 5 in New Mexico, we have 2 electoral votes for our senators and 3 for our representatives. There are 538 electors in total from all the states. And to win the Electoral College, a candidate must receive a majority of at least 270 electoral votes. This is a visual of how the Electoral College system works. And I want to call your attention to there's an important takeaway in the upper right-hand corner. Article 2 specifies that state legislatures decide how electors are chosen and does not require the choice of electors reflect the popular vote. The Electoral College was established in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution in 1787. Article 2 specified that the president and vice president would be elected by state-chosen electors, not the popular vote of the people. It called for state legislatures to appoint a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled. And again, there was no requirement that the electors' votes reflect the popular vote. And just to note, in addition to describing our system of electing our chief executives in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2 specifies the duties and responsibilities of the office of the president, such as commander-in-chief of the military. So how does this work in New Mexico? During their party conventions, each of our political parties chooses 5 potential electors. If their party's candidates win the state's popular vote, these 5 people would be the ones who actually vote to elect the president and vice president. The ballot you vote lists the names of the party candidates, but in reality, you are voting for the slate of electors who would actually cast the electoral votes for their candidates. Article 2 states that state legislatures will direct how to appoint electors, and again, does not require that it be proportional to the popular vote. New Mexico, like 48 of the 50 states, uses the winner-take-all method, where the candidates with the most popular votes in the state get all of its electoral votes, even if there is a significant minority of votes for the losing candidates. The party's electors then meet in New Mexico to actually cast their votes, and these votes are certified and sent to the president of the Senate to be opened and counted on January 6th. So if any of you want to raise your hand in the little chat, well, not the chat box, the hand raising, do you know these people? And I think, like me, most all of us had no idea that these were the people that were actually going to cast the votes for president from New Mexico. In the Federalist Papers, number 68, Hamilton defends the system of electors, saying they would be men, of course, chosen by the people for the special purpose of electing the president and vice president who would be most capable of analyzing the qualities adapted to the station, most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations. And my question is, when you voted, did you consider whether these people met those qualifications? So let's go a little bit into the historical background. During the convention, Constitutional Convention, delegates made a number of proposals for choosing the president and vice president, including by popular vote, having the US Congress choose the president, or having the state legislatures choose. The pros and cons of the proposals were debated periodically throughout the constitutional deliberations from May to September of 1787. But deliberations did not coalesce around any one method. In the last days of the convention, and people were literally getting ready to leave, the delegates chose a committee of 11 members to come up with solutions to the unresolved portions of the draft Constitution. The committee made the proposal to elect the president and vice president through a system of individuals called electors to act as proxies for the people in choosing the executives. So representation in the Senate and the House was a contentious, hotly debated issue in the formation of our new government. And Article 1 is the defining section of the Constitution on that. The question of representation affected taxation, contributions to the budget, and the relative power of each state. The delegates' decision on apportioning representation ultimately was used to determine representation in the Electoral College as well. Under the Articles of Confederation, the government we formed to unite against the British initial government, each state had one vote regardless of its size or population. For the new government, initial thoughts were that representation would be by population in both houses. But in the new government, the small states like Rhode Island and Delaware wanted to maintain their voting power and would lose power if representation was by population. At the same time, the large slave-owning states, such as Virginia and North and South Carolina, wanted slaves counted as part of their population for increased representation, but not counted for purposes of taxation, nor, of course, would they be allowed to vote. Under the threat by the small states and the slave states to withdraw from the Union, and of course that would mean, dissolution of the Union of our country, a compromise was reluctantly achieved. Each state would have 2 senators, regardless of population, and 3/5 of each state's slave population would count toward the state's total population for the purpose of apportioning the House of Representatives. And this was in Article 1 of the Constitution. This lopsided compromise on representation was then used in Article 2 as the method of determining the number of electors for each state. And of course, it gave the southern states more electors because of the counting of slaves, and the small states more electors proportionate to their population. And I'd like to go back just to note that at the time, delegates knew that if the small states and slave states walked away from the Union, it would be impossible to form a lasting system of government for our country. So they made a difficult and very imperfect compromise. So what's wrong with the Electoral College? 2 clauses of Article 2, Section 1, in particular, at the base of what is wrong with the Electoral College today. And they are provisions stemming from the small state compromise which allowed the electoral vote to differ from the popular vote, and the clause specifying that state legislatures direct the method of appointing electors. The first problem created by the small state compromise is unequal representation in the Electoral College. Abolishing slavery ended the 3/5 compromise that favored large states, but the small state compromise is still in force today. Because every state gets 2 electors, not based on population. Smaller states have 2 more electoral votes than they would if electors were apportioned by population. And for example, 1 electoral vote in Texas represents 782,000 people, while 1 electoral vote gives Montana's more clout because only 284,000 people get to share that 1 electoral vote. This results in unequal and unfair representation and can result in the loser of the popular vote winning in the Electoral College, as we well know. This graphic gives another example of the unequal representation that is a legacy of the small state compromise. And again, tiny Wyoming, 192,000 people get to share 1 electoral vote. Well, in huge Florida, that means 1 electoral vote has to encompass 717,000 people. What our democracy needs is for every person's vote to count the same. To do this, the Electoral College must be abolished and a direct popular vote put in its place. The second problem created by this unequal representation is that the electoral vote can differ from the popular vote, i.e., the electoral vote may not reflect the will of the people on a national basis. And I think it's important to remember that these 2 people, the president and vice president, represent our country as a whole, not a state or not a certain electoral group. So this unequal representation makes it popular to win the presidency while losing the popular vote. And of course, we recognize this has happened in our own memory in the last 20 some years, where 2 people, Donald Trump and George Bush, have been elected by the Electoral College while losing the popular vote of the nation's voters. This visual shows each candidate's percentage of the popular vote in the contest where the candidate winning the most votes of all Americans nevertheless lost the election in the Electoral College. And I think when you've got to think about population and percentage of population when you look at these percentages. In 1824, it was 1% of 3 or maybe 4 million people in the entire country. And now, or in 2016, it was 1% of 340 million people in our country. So the dichotomy increases as our country grows. So, winner take all. By Article 2, letting state legislatures decide how to apportion their electors with no requirement it reflect the popular vote, another level of unequal representation has been put into effect by our states. State legislatures in 48 states have gone to a winner-take-all system in which they apportion all of the state's electors to the winning candidate. Only 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, use a system in which the electoral vote for each congressional district is tied to the popular vote in that district. So what this means, for example, is that in 2020, California's winner-take-all system resulted in all of its 55 electoral votes going to the Democratic candidate. And this effectively nullified 6 million votes in California for the Republican candidate and over 500,000 votes for other candidates. And an interesting aside here is, where did Trump have them, and well, in what state did Trump get the most votes in 2020? And of course, it was that 6 million votes in California. New Mexico's winner-take-all system means that if you voted for the Republican candidates for president and vice president in 2024, your vote was effectively nullified because all of the state's electoral votes were given to the Democratic candidate. And just to put some numbers in front of you, Kamala Harris won the popular vote with 479,000 votes. Coming in number 2 was Donald Trump with 423,000 votes. And there were 21,000 votes for the candidates of other parties. So we're talking about, 400,000 plus votes being nullified because our system is winner take all. And the result is this hurts both parties or all parties. If you're in a red state and you vote blue, your vote won't count, and the reverse is true as well. So many people don't bother to vote if they favor a minority candidate because they know their vote will be nullified. And this goes for either party. So winner takes all belies the real popular vote and really creates an unfair system and an unequal system of voting. The Electoral College system and the winner-take-all method of choosing electors have created the swing state problem. And candidates concentrate their time and money in the few states where the vote is closely divided and ignore states with traditional majorities of one party or the other. So this meant in 2024 that these 7 states on the map got the vast majority of visits from candidates, the vast majority of money put into advertising, and a huge number of campaign events compared to us in New Mexico or most of the other states in the union. This is what the winner-take-all system does. It creates red or blue states that do not reflect the very nature of the state's popular vote. And I'd like to note Nebraska and Maine, where they apportion electoral votes by congressional districts. So in red Nebraska, you have one district that voted Democratic and thus was allocated one of their 5 electoral votes. And of course, then the reverse is true in blue Maine, where they had one congressional district that voted Republican. And if you shade our votes by vote share, this is more what we really look like in terms of how our voting goes. And this map is one of my personal favorites. This 2024 county by county depiction shows how even in states where all the electoral votes went to one party, there are significant numbers of people who voted for other candidates. We are much more nuanced politically than the Electoral College makes us seem. And it's my hope that we are also less divided. And this is by congressional district. And without winner take all, this is what our representation should look like. So what needs to be done? We need to abolish the Electoral College and go to a one-person, one-vote system for electing our national president and vice president. I wanted to stop here for a minute and think about the tremendous differences between 1787 and 2026 in our size, our voting population. Our culture has changed tremendously. We have far better access to education, especially for women, even though we're kind of low ranking among developed countries. Our transportation is vastly different from the horse and buggy system that was facing our forefathers in 1787. And our technological advances are huge, and they've led to, I think, one of the most important things, which is we now have secure and fast voting systems. Looking at this, there's no question in my mind that Article 2 is ripe for change. So we need a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College. And we need to replace it with a one-person, one-vote system to elect the president and vice president in a fair way. A direct popular vote will not only be fair to all voters, but it will be a vastly simpler and faster way to elect our chief executives. If we follow direct vote systems in other major democracies, states' tallies of votes could be counted, certified, and sent to a federal body to compile the total popular vote for the entire country within days of the election. State legislatures would not be able to interfere, ignore the people's votes, or reapportion the votes to make winners out of losers. This is a visual of the constitutional amendment process. There needs to be a proposal, and it could be either by a constitutional convention of all the states or a proposal within our federal legislature, so our Senate and or House of Representatives. This proposal to abolish the Electoral College and go to a popular vote would have to pass 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. And then it would move on to the states, and 3/4 of the states would have to ratify for the amendment to come into effect. Passing a constitutional amendment is a daunting prospect, but it has been done 27 times now. And 6 of those amendments changed how we elect the president, added term limits, extended voting rights to women and all citizens, and so on. The history of amendments shows this has typically happened after some crisis in our government. The current constitutional crisis may be just the right time to amend our Constitution to abolish the Electoral College and give every single person registered to vote a vote. So the closest we've come to abolishing the Electoral College was in 1970, but the idea has stayed alive and resolutions continue to be submitted. According to a 2024 Pew Research Center poll, 63% of Americans now favor a direct popular vote, and that's a good percentage of all Americans. One of the most recent proposals for change, Senate Joint Resolution 121, was made by Senators Durbin, Welch, and Schatz in December of 2024. It would abolish the Electoral College and establish one person, one vote. The concept of abolishing the Electoral College can seem abstract, so I wanted to put in your mind that what the text of an actual Constitution amendment might look like by showing the Senate Joint Resolution 121 text. And the operative portions are in red. Section 2, each voter shall cast a single vote for 2 persons who have consented to the joining of their names as candidates for president and vice president. And section 3, the pair of candidates having the greatest number of votes for president and vice president shall be elected. Now, how simple is that? So the League of Women Voters and many other organizations have begun a nationwide campaign to educate the public and build momentum for a constitutional amendment to put in place one person, one vote. As part of the campaign, local leagues like ours are giving educational presentations to community groups such as this one today. And if you're interested in joining this movement, please feel free to contact me or contact your local league or join your local league. Elizabeth Kavanaugh, who's head of the nonprofit Making Every Vote Count, it's a group of constitutional lawyers that are working to abolish the Electoral College and put one vote per person per voter in place. Elizabeth thinks of abolishing the Electoral College like this: be prepared for when the time is right, and that time may coming sooner than some think. I thought I'd stop here and read a quote from Thomas Jefferson. Each generation is independent of the one preceding. Like them, it has then a right to choose for itself the form of government it believes most promotive of its own happiness. And this was a shared belief in all our founders when they tried, or when they established the government that we're still using some 250 years later. So with that, let's go to questions and discussion, and I welcome consideration of other views about abolishing the Electoral College. I believe Felicia is going to step in and read some of the chat questions, and we'll get to it.
See here. Oh, thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you for inviting me.
Carol Ann actually posed the first question. Why are some people against this? Either party could win or lose the popular vote.
Some of it, to my mind, comes from, decades and hundreds of years ago when our country was really quite divided. We formed a union to fight the British, but then the Articles of Confederation, it became clear that they were good for trying to fight a war, but they really didn't constitute a system of governance. And in the convention, there was a lot of difference in states, between the North and South, and later between uh, states that wanted to expand to the West and so on. So I think there's a long-standing American, there's some deep cultural differences, but also our states have, and our system of government have continued to, place a lot of importance on states' rights and things like that. More recently, I think people recognize the unfairness of the two elections in the last, 20 some years, that gave us, that their vote was taken away. And this gave us a president that was not the winner of the national vote. All these are kind of underlying currents, I think, to make people unhappy with the system.
Thank you. And then we have a comment with a question from Kyle Wheeler. I'm still waiting for the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, to get passed. What is the likelihood that an amendment to abolish the Electoral College would get through the House and Senate?
Well, I have to tell Kyle that Virginia, the state I used to reside in, finally passed the Equal Rights Amendment. And President Biden at the time did not act on it, did not act to pass it on as required to the archival system, and it just died. So it did pass. It took a heck of a long time. And it had, while we were trying to pass it, much of the virile opposition that we sometimes see in discussions about the Electoral College today. I quite frankly believe that we need to educate people more. Most people just haven't a clue that that person on the ballot that they're voting for is not who's going to decide who the electors actually vote for. The other thing is, as Elizabeth Kavanaugh says, you need to be ready because things are building up here in our country with many people unhappy about the way our democracy is going. And, being ready means have a text prepared for an amendment, educate people to what the Electoral College really does and doesn't do, and talk to your congressman, be prepared to act on it.
All right, thank you. I see two more questions here. What might be the reason that 37% of the people do not support abolishing the Electoral College?
Well, I think we should go to, let's see, Mythbusters. There are a lot of arguments being made that just don't hold up to facts. And some of them are, a lot of people believe that the Electoral College abolishing the Electoral College would mean that big cities or big states would be the ones that actually elect the president, and thus rural and suburban areas, their votes wouldn't count. And you can see from these graphs here that, the big cities, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, only count for 5% of our population, and everyone else is 95%. So do the math on that. The 10 biggest cities only comprise 8% of the population, everyone else 92. And, here you're looking at, and the third on the right, the rural population is 14%. Only 15% of the population is in biggest cities, and everybody else pretty much comprises 71%. I think the same set of arguments is very popular, in a lot of people's putting forth reasons not to abolish the Electoral College. And this is especially true, I think, in small states where they think they'll lose their advantage, which in some sense they will, but these are the leaders of our entire country. So their share ought to be what their population reflects.
Thank you. Let's see. What about the alternative to abolishing the Electoral College that several states have passed? I think they pledged to have the electors follow the national popular vote. Not enough states have signed on.
You've hit a raw nerve with me. I cannot understand why any legislature that actually read the text of this National Popular Vote Interstate Compact would agree to it. And what the National Popular Vote Compact is, it was introduced in 2006. It's designed to achieve election of the US president by who wins the national popular vote without changing the Constitution. It's an agreement by states. It isn't a part of the Constitution, Article 2, about electing the president. It's an interstate compact. So states that join the compact to allocate agree to allocate all their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. And it would require enough states to total 270 electors to join the compact before the compact would go into force. And the current total is 209. And when in force, so enough states would have to join the compact. When in force, and if a state is party to the compact, the state would cast all its electoral votes for the winner of the national popular vote, no matter who was the winner of the popular vote in that state. And I think in the time period when it was originated in, near 2000 and after the Republican candidate won the electoral vote and lost the popular vote, it was an indication, I believe, of people trying to bring forward a fair vote in presidential selection on the national popular vote. That said, and I think it was an honest intention, it's been stuck for like a decade at 2009, and many people believe it has no more potential for coming into force as a state compact than actually amending the Constitution to abolish the Electoral College. And just looking at the text and the legal part of the compact, it's a truly inherently unstable system. States can join or withdraw at any time they decide to do so, potentially leading to major changes in voting systems with each national election. And we see now parties have learned to game the Electoral College with swing states and so on. But you can imagine what this would do with state legislatures changing, either agreeing to join the compact or withdrawing from the compact, and withdrawing from the compact within, say, a short time before an election. It's certain to be challenged in the courts as unconstitutional because it is Article 2 of the Constitution that specifies how we vote for president and vice president. And this would bring the results of a national election into question and potentially throw it into the courts. And then for me, kind of the worst part of the whole thing is that winner takes all already nullifies votes for candidates with a minority of the state's popular vote. But if a state was part of the compact, this would mean that if a majority of the state's popular vote was not for the national popular vote winner, the majority of the state's popular votes would be nullified and they would be cast for the loser of the state's popular votes in the Electoral College. And as an example, in 2024, for the first time in decades, the Republican candidate won the national popular vote and also won in the Electoral College. And what that would have meant for New Mexico, who voted Democratic as the majority of the popular votes, it would have meant that all the votes for the Democratic candidate would be nullified and all our Electoral College votes would have been cast for Trump. So there you go. That's my long and passionate statement about the compact.
Thank you for that. You mentioned earlier in response to an earlier question that the states opposed to abolishing the Electoral College feared that their own influence would be less. Do you have anything to add in particular about the southern states who are opposed?
Hmm. And I'm not well an election analyst, so I can say that there's just been a current, that's existed throughout, well, since the Articles of Confederation, where southern states and northern states have for many, many reasons differed. And the most fundamental one was about slavery. And that in itself, I think, led to, well, we looked, let me see if I can find that slide again. In 1970, for instance, we came extremely close to abolishing the Electoral College. And it was killed by the Dixiecrats, who, quite frankly, did everything they could to prevent, Black people from voting at the time. And it's that kind of current that has come through our country. And that's all I can say really about that. I'm not qualified to make any different, more, in-depth analysis.
All right, thank you. From Mary Smith, if voters saw the maps and graphics showing the inequity, I would think many more people would be on board with abolishing the Electoral College. What organizations are working with the League of Women Voters to try to spread the word about this movement?
Well, I have mentioned Elizabeth Kavanaugh, who's the head, well, the executive director of the nonprofit Making Every Vote Count. And I think and they have done a fine job of collecting constitutional lawyers to work on examining the issue and trying to decide what to do. And if you go online and look up Making Every Vote Count, you can have access. I think you still have to request it, but they have published a report, and I'm trying to find it right here, called Improving Our Electoral College System. And that report is a legal analysis of all of the proposals we've had for improving our electoral system. And they include, all kinds of things. The compact, an amendment to abolish it. There's another one faction of the change seeks to increase representation, so increase members of the House of Representatives, saying that would be then fold into how the Electoral College apportions votes. Anyway, I think if people take a look at that, and Wikipedia does a fine job on abolishing the Electoral College. And spreading those maps around, to me, when I first saw them, and that's why I included them, it's just, it hits you in the face. You can't run away from that. So all of these things, I think people should examine and learn, and can help us join those groups, such as Making Every Vote Count or the League of Women Voters.
Okay, Thank you for that. And our final comment is from Carol Ann. I wonder if this information you shared is ever taught in government classes in high school. I'm sure I never knew about all of this. This was quite enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah. I would say, well, my previous shot at America and our education system, we are the laggards and continue to fall in you know in major countries in terms of good education for our people. So I think we need to work on it, but it's adults who've already been through this that are voting now. So I think we also need to independently do things like the league is doing now, which is educate voters.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Barbara Califf, and the rest of us, I'm sure, join in thanking you for this excellent presentation, Anne. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you all for inviting me, and get out there and get people going.
Thank you so much.